definitely scope for operators to just repurpose their existing space. Maybe people don't need 200 250 square feet of space and put in two people. You might just have 100 square feet of space, much more compact rooms. But definitely, I think the world is moving in a direction which is going to enable that, right? So I think that makes a lot of sense. I actually have a very interesting question here for Saurabh, which is something that I can see the audience have asked as well. So Saurabh, you obviously come from a marketing background, and University Living is one of the best platforms for student housing operators to market their facilities. So I think Aman has posed a question here on what are some ways that student housing companies should market themselves post this pandemic. So any tips that you can share on some things that they should be doing differently or anything in that regard?
Yeah, absolutely. So we need to build up communities. We need to differentiate basic experience. We all need to understand we are not we are not in the business of selling rooms. We are in the business of enhancing experience. If you are
Right.
focusing on community, if you are focusing on experience, right? I mean, even the two buildings together can charge 30% premium if your experience, if your basic safety, security, is being taken care, because end of the day it's not students who are paying. They are customer is their parents. And when they're sending their students to different cities or different countries, right, they need safety, security, and value for money. And students need experience and networking community. So rather than spending a lot and shouting out on Facebooks or Google AdWords and all, this is a business of creating community, and it's not like impulse buying, right? Students are going to book for a year, or they are going to book for a semester. So they're
Right.
going to take time, and it's about how much you train your team and how much you focus on experience of your students. So I believe organic marketing the best way out. Organic SEO, your paid ads, that gonna help. But over a period of time, especially with mass experience, and that student will give you 10 more students.
Okay, all right, fair enough. So Sam, anything to add here? I remember our discussion a little earlier that not just online ads, right? I think you've done at UJ Hostels quite a lot of offline marketing as well to acquire your customers. So any insights that you can share with our audience?
I really agree with what Saurabh said. I think today, I think too many operators are just relying too much on Google Ads and Facebook Ads. It becomes too mechanical. I think with any businesses, especially even this time, especially pandemic time, you need to do brand building. I think for me, I think for the past 3 years, we've been doing nothing but brand building. I think brand building is very, very important. I think like Saurabh said, it's part of the experience. It's part of people knowing what your brand stands for. What's the experience I'm going to get if I come stay with you versus a private owner versus the on-campus or versus a property agent. And that becomes very, very important. So I think moving forward, my recommendation is if you guys have not started, any of the operators who are listening in, really start working on your branding. What's your value proposition? How are you differentiated from the other operators? What type of service, what type of experience you are providing?
Sure.
And that becomes very, very important as we move forward. I think if you look at technology trend, moving a lot into voice search. Can you imagine if I say I'm looking for rooms near University ABC, right?
Mm-hmm.
Google or Siri or Amazon going to send you to whoever will pay them the highest, right?
Mm-hmm.
But imagine this, for example, hey Google, can you help me to book a UJ hostel room? So when brand becomes important thing, when you utter the word of brand, right? None of
Right.
these voice search are able to control that. Today with normal search, you can go through page and click on whichever you want. But as we move towards
Sure.
voice search, you will no longer have that ability. And what makes you differentiated and what makes you able to continue to stand up there, it's
Mm-hmm.
brand. So brand building
Okay.
is very, very important. You need to really start today if you have not done so.
Very interesting. Okay. All right. I think I'll ask one more question from the audience before we go, which is that at what occupancy rate does it make sense to operate student housing facilities? I think that's a relevant question. And how are operators currently dealing with lower occupancy rates, at the moment? So can anyone share, at what point does it, does the occupancy start breaking even?
Yeah, I think I can take that one. So I think the question is twofold. Are you asking the question from a developer's perspective or the operator perspective? So from a developer's perspective, it all depends on your cost base, what's your underlying land cost and what's your construction cost, then, what's the bed price of the students that are paying. But, as a developer, we don't look at any property that is going to perform below 95% occupancy for students. We are used to occupancy levels of 95 to 100%. And, but I mean, most of the time, on average, after operational expenses and all that, 55 to 60% break even after operator fees is a decent number that we look at. But we would not. But again, we would look to projects that are 90, 95% occupancy.
Okay.
But, yeah, sorry.
Okay, so 90-95% occupancy. Okay, that's a fairly high occupancy rate, and I think right now a lot of operators are having challenges, right? So we're not even close to that number.
Yeah. From operators' perspective, if you're on a management agreement, it's not relevant. You still make fees, but you'll make little fees. But if you have rented the properties, then that's big trouble, because the moment you dip below break-even point, we call that valley of death.
Right.
Get out there as quickly as possible.
Right.
And burn cash, yeah.
And it also depends upon which market you're operating.
I think one of the points that I think our audience would definitely love to hear is that let's say you're a very heavily funded student housing operator and you've managed to raise venture capital money, or I think even in the case of, let's say, UJ Hostels, you've been around for many years now, right? So I'm sure you already have a cash flow engine that's set in and deep relationship with landlords. So I think navigating such a heavy market downturn while still challenging for you is something that you're likely to get past and see on the other side of. But how do small operators get past this? Like put yourself in the shoes of maybe a mom and pop or someone who just wanted to build a lifestyle business for themselves, who have, let's say, maybe 100, 200, 300 rooms under their management. How do they get past like tough times like these? Any inputs on that?
Let me answer that. I think at the end of the day, I think very similar to the question that you had earlier, it's really managing your cost base. If you have 100, 200 rooms, you're most likely going to run a very low cost base. If student housing is something that you wanted to do, but also check around that area. I think something that we have done for the past 6 months, rather than leaving the rooms empty, we have carved out some of those rooms or some of those units where we separate them. And what happened is during the pandemic, a lot of people are losing their jobs, or those people are getting pay cuts. So previously they were able to afford a studio unit or a whole house. Because of the pay cut, because of potentially losing their job, they're also worried. They started downsizing. They started going into renting rooms where everything is taken care of, and if anything happens, they can just let go and just pack their bag and go. So
sure,
the property is already there. Right? Whether you rent it to a student or you rent it to a working adult, it's the same. Whether you rent it to a long-term person or a short-term person, it's also the same. As long as accommodation, something that you can get into, my recommendation is start looking for those opportunities. Start pivoting. I'm not asking you to pivot it completely. If you see opportunity to pivot completely, maybe you can expand as one way to do it. But alternatively, these are short-term stopgap measures that can help you to continue to manage your cost base, so that you don't bleed. Like what Kamran was saying, that if you rent the property outright, and whether it's sitting empty or 100%, you still got to pay rental to the landlord, and landlord's not going to be giving you discounts or anything. So you might as well make good use of it. As long as it's private accommodation, I don't think you're breaking any tenancy agreement.
Fair enough. I think at this point, it's more a question of just put anyone who's willing to, like rent the room, just put them inside the room and start getting your cash flow in, just to help you with the payments. And I think it's a very good point that you've made, Sam, that it need not be a long-term pivot, like just do what you need to do, to survive the next 6 months or maybe a year. Because I think long-term, the industry is poised for success. So I think that's a very important point. I think, one of the points that we had discussed a little earlier, right? And I think in your own words that student housing is not pandemic proof, right? It might be recession proof. It has lasted, it has come out successful against a lot of the previous recessions, but jury is still out, is it pandemic proof? And by the looks of it, it's not. So over the last 10 years, the investor appetite for student housing has been very strong, both in private equity with respect to creating the assets, as well as a lot of operators have been successful in raising venture capital money as well, to build out their operator business. So any sense that, you can share with us on what are investors thinking about this domain right now?
Sure. So, I mean, thank you, Ajay. Just like you said, student housing has established itself as a very resilient asset class. And when you look at from the private equity investors' perspective, it's a great way for them to diversify. And majority of the private equity players, VC, that are present in India, quite few of them have big mandates still for student housing. And I think just last month, it was announced that we were expecting an incentive package, and we received, I think, a very good incentive package under Affordable Rental Housing Complexes Act. And now if you want to build for either the urban poor, urban migrants, or students where there's a need, what's happening is the government is saying if you want to build on your own land, there are two models, but use innovative technologies in construction, you get a 10% grant. And then the GST and income taxes waived in operations. And these are huge incentives. And just recently, this affordable rental housing complexes has been classified as infrastructure, a subcategory. So also now sovereign wealth funds and pension funds are going to be exempt from income tax going forward. I mean, this is just as attractive as it gets. That's on the PE funds, because majority of the universities are looking to give their land or part of the campus under public-private partnership, where a developer like ourselves comes on, raises construction finance on the land, but in return we get the occupancy and the price guarantee from the university. So it's a very secure investment. So I think
been tried, in fact, off lately we have tied with one of the vendor who can provide you gluten-free custom salads, in your rooms, right? So I guess, that concept gonna come in India and in South Asia, wherein, operator will not get into food, but then they will tie with these vendors who can ensure that they get the quality of food, and, the margins are not been hit. But in India, it's very different. I'm sure Carmen must be, figuring out the way to sell rooms without food.
Thank you, Shurab. I definitely agree. So student housing, I think, it's you have to get three things right. That's location has to be right. You have to have amazing Wi-Fi. Then you have to have good food. But the thing is, just like how universities' main business is not student housing, our main business is not food. So, and no matter what you do, you provide the open buffet from Four Seasons. After 2 months, everybody gets bored of it. So even the quality of your food is great, it's the same, but it's just after eating the same thing over and over again, people get bored of it. So I think over there, the trick is having multiple vendors who are best in their fields, and have a rotational plan where you kind of keep changing what they're eating. So that's kind of the way we've been managing this. But again, coming back to the question, yes, it's a very important part of the decision as well. But obviously, in comparison to the location and the physical status of the property, it's secondary. But again, it's an important decision point.
Okay, all right, fair enough. Okay, I think one question here, which is very interesting, I think maybe Sam can help us answer this, is what do operators do to develop a sense of community amongst the students? Are there events which are being conducted by operators in association with universities? And maybe one point that I can add is, in a world post-COVID, potentially, like, where people meeting up physically is always going to be a challenge or something that's going to be questioned. How do operators build a sense of community amongst their tenants?
So, okay, what we do in the past, I think we're still going to continue to do, provided we have the social distancing part settled. It's whenever we have a big intake coming in, we always have what we call a welcome dinner. It gave us an opportunity, to get all the students to meet up, so they kind of know who are they staying with, who are those potentially same class students that they may not have met before. But it also gave us an opportunity for us to introduce our team, as well as some that's there. Otherwise, because typically if we send it to them via WhatsApp chat or via email, they never bother to read. Same goes with the tenancy agreement. So this opportunity for us to do that. But it also helps us to provide some value proposition to students to say that, hey, but in the past we also provide some local trips, especially if you have a lot of foreign students coming in. What we do is we engage operator where we kind of bring them around to key areas around town. Sometimes we do hiking trips. Sometimes we do some camping trips. So these are some of the small things that doesn't cost us a lot of money, but it helps us to provide a very differentiated living experience for the students. So that's how we kind of create a community sense of belonging, that they are part of something bigger versus just renting a room.
Okay, all right, okay. So I think that answers that question. We have one more with respect to from Shakti Thakur, which says that in India we talk about co-living. It's a very new concept, undoubtedly, and people are attracted towards this, but it's hard to manage the standards throughout, and many firms lack here. I think that's a very interesting point, because with respect to the accommodation or the service which is provided to the tenants, it's not a 1 hour service or a 1 week service. It's minimum 1 year. It's likely to go on for multiple years. And you need to ensure that you give a very organized and a streamlined experience from start to finish. As we all know, like with respect to students and with respect to customers at large, if you give a great experience, nobody gives you a pat on your back. But if you give a bad experience, you can rest assured that it's going to go on social media. So how do you tackle that? Now, how do you give a streamlined experience throughout from start to finish? Yeah, Karaman can take this. Yeah.
No, I think, I mean, it's a relevant point. We will see that products are going to get standardized. I mean, from many aspects. So I think it's not just adding some colorful pillows and curtains and slapping a sign on building and calling it co-living. That's not our business. So, we actually start designing the product itself.
Right.
And smoke insulation, fire doors, these will get standardized over time. But, it's a process. We are still at the very nascent stages. But I think, we will see that some brands are going to come out in a very standardized way. And, then the others will follow after that. So it's transforming as we speak, I think.
Yep. I think it's a very good point that you brought up. It's that the industry in itself is in its infancy. I think for all of us who are very closely associated with the industry, it feels like, oh, this has been around forever. But in reality, it's maybe like a 10-year-old industry. Like more globally, it's like maybe like a couple of years in emerging economies. So I think there's a lot more to be done. I think one point that a lot of tenants might not understand is that it's not just the operator's fault. In a lot of cases, the asset is owned by someone else, and the landlord is simply not willing to cooperate, to get the maintenance works done, or, to get the refurbishments done. So although the operator typically ends up taking the blame. So I think it's a fair point. I think as an industry, we need to wait out a little bit more. And, as you said, I think as we have more purpose-built facilities coming in and, operators, as they start reaching the next level of maturity, I think this problem is likely to solve itself. I think the last question that I see that's been posted here is, how do you think the worst effect is happening on the student housing in terms of occupancy? What can be done to address this drop and anything to lessen the impact? I think, we've already given a couple of suggestions. I think Sam has, given the idea that you should start looking for customers in other segments, not just in student housing, and not just look at long term. You can even look at short term accommodation options as well. Anything else that you think we can add to this before we close out? Fair enough. I think one last question here. It's a fairly long question, but I'm just going to summarize it, to see if one of you can take this as well. I think a lot is being said about community building and community development, but in reality, people are just renting out space. How do we convince people, to invest deeper into community, and how do we convince that there is an actual ROI that is associated with, doing community engagement, and it leads to referrals and so on. So, any pointers or anything that any of you can, help in this conversation? How do we actually convince operators and society at large that it's worth investing in community and not just keep spending your money on ad dollars?
I think, I can answer that one. So they say the bed price is this. That's the underlying real estate value. But
right.
When you have that community aspect and you can make a difference in people's lives, then you learn Iceland.
Right.
So actually you achieve a premium on top of your underlying. So I think, that's the...
Fair enough. I think that's a good point. I think like taking a leaf off of the WeWork playbook, they stopped calling it renting seats or renting, renting floor space. They kind of like started selling memberships. and it was the community which was essentially sold. It was the fact that, like you get free beer on, weekdays, and the fact that there are so many events where you can network. And that's the reason why WeWork today, even today, is priced at least 20 to 30% premium over its closest rival in any city that we look at. So I think that there is a very clear case study that we can look at for this. I think we have answered all the questions that have come in. That brings us to an end of this discussion. I think we're right on time as well. Thanks to all three panelists, for tuning in today. It was a very insightful discussion. Also, thanks to all the other speakers who had come on over the last couple of days. We had more than 15 people turn up. Thanks to all of our audience members. Like, we had more than 1,000 people who turned up on all 3 days put together. This officially brings us to a close for this event on student housing, as well as the Monk Realty Summit for 2020. Thank you so much for tuning in. We look forward to seeing you again next year as well. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajay. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, House Monk team. Thanks.